The sky over my farm turned green at 11 at night, and that is how this whole thing started. I was standing by the fence, checking on the goats, when the clouds above the north field lit up like someone had poured paint into them. Not lightning. Lightning does not hang in the air and pulse like a heartbeat. I dropped the bucket I was holding and watched a thin line of light break away from the clouds and fall toward the trees behind my house. I ran inside and found Lyra already standing at the window. She was not looking outside. She was looking at her own hands. "Lyra," I said, "did you see that?" She did not answer right away. In 5 years, I had never seen her go this still. Lyra was always moving, always doing something with her hands, always humming some tune from a world I would never see. But that night she stood frozen, and her skin, which usually held a soft gray-blue color, had gone pale, almost white. "Something is coming," she said quietly. "Something that knows where I am." I did not understand what she meant. Not yet. Let me back up, because you need to know who Lyra was to me before I tell you what happened next. 5 years ago, I found her half buried in the mud behind my barn, wrapped in a torn silver suit, bleeding from a wound on her side that looked like nothing I had ever seen. Her skin was the wrong color, her eyes were too large, and they had a faint golden ring around the pupil that seemed to glow in low light. I should have called the police. I should have called someone, anyone. Instead, I carried her into my house, cleaned her wound with what I had, and sat next to her bed for 2 days straight, waiting to see if she would live. She lived. When she woke up, she did not scream or panic. She looked at me with those strange golden eyes and said one word in a language I had never heard, then switched to broken English a moment later, as if she had pulled the words out of my own mind. "Do not tell," she said. "Please, do not tell anyone." I do not know why I agreed. Maybe it was the fear in her voice. Maybe it was something in the way she said please, like she had never had to ask anyone for anything in her life, and hated that she had to ask now. Whatever it was, I nodded, and from that day on, Lyra became part of my life in a way I never planned for, and never questioned. She learned English fast, faster than seemed natural. Within a year she was making jokes with the shop owner in town, a cheerful man named Nathan who never once asked why the quiet woman living with Daniel Carter had eyes like a cat, and never got sunburned no matter how long she stood in the fields. People in town accepted her the way small towns sometimes do, without asking too many questions, just glad to have another face at the market on Sundays. She helped me with the farm. She turned out to be stronger than she looked, strong enough to lift bales of hay I struggled with myself. She never got sick. She never seemed to need much sleep, and some nights I would wake up and find her sitting outside, staring at the stars with an expression I could not read. I asked her once, early on, where she came from. "Somewhere far," she said. "Somewhere I cannot go back to." I asked why. She looked at me for a long moment, then changed the subject, and I learned not to ask again. Some doors, I told myself, do not need to be opened. I had a friend, a companion, someone who laughed at my terrible cooking, and taught me songs in a language with no name I could pronounce. That was enough. It had been enough for 5 years. Until that night, when the sky turned green, and something fell out of it. I grabbed a flashlight and went out toward the trees, and Lyra followed me, walking faster than I had ever seen her walk, her bare feet moving over the wet grass without hesitation, like she already knew exactly where the thing had landed. We found it in the small clearing past the old oak tree. A smooth silver object, about the size of a shoebox, sitting in a shallow burn mark in the grass. It had no visible seams, no buttons, nothing that looked like technology I understood. It simply sat there, humming very softly, waiting. Lyra stopped 10 feet away from it and would not go closer. "What is it?" I asked. "A delivery seal," she said. Her voice had changed. It was flatter now, more controlled, like she was holding something back with great effort. "It only opens for the person it was sent to." "Sent by who?" She did not answer. I stepped forward instead, curious in the way that has gotten me into trouble my whole life, and the moment my shadow crossed the object, it clicked and split open along a line that had not existed a second before. Inside, resting on a bed of soft light, was something that looked like a folded sheet of dark metal, covered edge to edge in symbols that moved slightly when I tilted my head, like they were alive. "Do not touch it," Lyra said sharply. I pulled my hand back. She walked forward slowly, like a person approaching a wild animal, and knelt beside the open case. She stared at the symbols for a long time without speaking. Her hands were shaking, just slightly, the kind of shake you only notice if you have spent 5 years learning every small movement someone makes. "Lyra," I said. "What is this?" She reached out and closed the case without taking the letter out. "Not tonight," she whispered. "I cannot do this tonight." She stood up, picked up the sealed case with both hands, like it weighed far more than it looked, and walked back toward the house without another word. I followed her, my flashlight beam bouncing over the grass, my mind racing through every explanation I could think of, and finding none of them made any sense. That night, she locked herself in the spare room where she kept her few belongings from before I found her, a small collection of things I had never been allowed to look through. I stood outside the door for a while, listening. I could hear her breathing on the other side, slow and controlled, the way people breathe when they are trying very hard not to fall apart. I did not sleep much that night. In the morning, she came out like nothing had happened. She made tea the way she always did, humming that same tune under her breath, and for a moment, I almost convinced myself I had dreamed the whole thing. Then I saw the case sitting on the kitchen table, unopened, and I remembered that some things are too strange to forget, no matter how much you want to. "You are not going to tell me what that is," I said. It was not really a question. Lyra set down her cup and looked at me with an expression I had never seen on her face before. Not fear exactly, something heavier than fear, something that looked almost like grief. "I will tell you," she said, "soon, I promise you that. But there are things about me that I have kept from you, Daniel, not because I wanted to lie, but because telling you would put you in danger. And I think that danger has already found us." Outside, far above the farm, a thin trail of light crossed the morning sky and disappeared over the hills, moving too fast and too smoothly to be any plane I had ever seen. Lyra watched it go, and her hand tightened around the edge of the table until her knuckles turned pale. "They know I am here," she said quietly. "The letter was only the beginning." I did not know it yet, but the woman I had shared my home with for 5 years, the woman who fed my goats and laughed at my jokes, and hummed songs from a world I had never seen, was about to tell me a truth that would change both our lives forever. I just did not know how big that truth would turn out to be. The letter sat on our kitchen table for 3 days, and in 3 days, Lyra did not touch it once. She would walk past it in the morning and pretend not to see it. She would clean around it at night, moving her cloth carefully over every inch of the table, except the small space where the silver case sat. I watched her do this again and again, and each time, I told myself I would ask her about it later, when she was ready. But the days went by, and the fear in her eyes did not fade. It only grew heavier, like a weight she was carrying alone, and refusing to set down. On the 3rd night, I could not stay quiet anymore. "Lyra," I said, sitting across from her at the table, the letter between us, like a stone neither of us wanted to lift. "You told me you would explain. I am not asking because I am angry. I am asking because I am scared for you." She looked up at me, and for the first time in 5 years, I saw something in her face that I can only describe as exhaustion, not the tired kind that comes from a long day of work. The kind that comes from carrying something heavy for far too long, alone, in silence, hoping it would never catch up to you. "Do you remember when you found me?" she asked. "Every detail," I said. "You never asked why I was alone, why there was no one else. No ship, no rescue coming for me." She wrapped her hands around her cup, though the tea inside had long gone cold. "I told you not to ask, and you listened. I have always been grateful for that, but I think the time for not asking is over." I stayed quiet and let her speak. "Where I come from," she began, "things are decided by blood. Not by choice, not by vote, but by blood. The family you are born into decides what you will become, whether you want it or not. I was born into a family that ruled." She paused, watching my face carefully, as if trying to guess how I would react before she said the next part. "My family did not simply have power. We were the power. For longer than your entire history of written words, my bloodline sat above every other family on my world." I did not fully understand what she meant, not in that moment, so I said nothing and waited. "There was a man," she continued, her voice growing tighter with every word. A general, a man my own family trusted. With our armies, our fleets, everything we had built to protect our people. His name was Vos Cauldron, and for years, he served us with what looked like loyalty. I called him uncle, though we shared no blood. I trusted him more than almost anyone in my life. Her hand trembled slightly around the cup. On the night everything changed, he came to the palace with soldiers who wore our colors, but answered to him alone. My parents did not survive that night. My brother did not survive that night. I only survived because a servant I barely knew pulled me through a hidden passage and put me on the last transport leaving the planet before the palace fell. She looked down at her hands. I was told to go as far as I could, to a world so unimportant that no one would ever think to look there. I did not choose Earth because it was beautiful, Daniel. I chose it because your world was so far from anything that mattered to my people that I believed I would be forgotten. I sat there, stunned, trying to piece together 5 years of small moments into this enormous, impossible truth. You are saying, I said slowly, that you are some kind of noble, royalty. Lyra met my eyes, and for the first time since I had known her, there was no hiding in her expression, no softening of the truth to make it easier to hear. I am not simply royalty, she said. By the laws of my people, upon the deaths of my parents and my brother, the crown passed to me. I did not want it. I never wanted it. But by blood and by law, I am the last true ruler of my world. I am their queen, whether I hide in a farmhouse on Earth or not. The word hung in the air between us, heavier than anything I had ever heard spoken in that kitchen. A queen, I repeated, because I did not know what else to say. A queen with no crown, no throne, and no people who know she is alive, she said quietly, until now. She reached out and finally touched the letter, running her fingers along the edge of the case without opening it. This seal only responds to royal blood, she said. It was built by my family generations ago, meant to find any surviving member of our line, no matter where in the stars they hid. If it has found me, it means someone still loyal to my family knows I am alive, and if they know, then it is only a matter of time before Vos Cauldron knows as well. Then do not open it, I said, the fear in my own voice surprising me. Send it back. Destroy it. Whatever you have to do. Lyra shook her head slowly. It does not work like that. This seal was sent, which means it already carries a record of where it landed. My hiding place is no longer a secret, Daniel, whether I open this letter or not. The only question now is whether I face what is inside with my eyes open, or whether I let it find me unprepared. She placed both hands on the case, closed her eyes for a moment, and then, with a soft click, the seal opened again, revealing the same folded sheet of dark metal I had seen in the clearing. This time, she lifted it out with steady hands. The symbols on its surface shifted and rearranged themselves the moment her fingers touched the metal, and I watched in silence, as lines of light formed words I could not read, though Lyra's lips moved slightly as she read them, as if she were hearing a voice only she could understand. I watched her face change as she read, surprise, then something that looked almost like hope, then, finally, a grief so deep it seemed to fold her shoulders forward. What does it say? I asked, when I could not bear the silence any longer. She set the letter down gently, as if it might break, and looked at me with eyes that shone with unshed tears. It is from Rael, she said, a commander of my father's personal guard, one of the few men I trusted completely, and one I believed had died the same night my family did. She took a slow breath. He did not die. He has spent 5 years searching every corner of known space for any surviving heir to the throne, hoping, praying, that someone from my bloodline still lived. He found me. That is good, is it not? I asked carefully. Someone loyal? Someone who wants to help you? It should be good, Lyra said, and her voice cracked slightly on the last word. But the letter carries more than hope, Daniel. It carries a warning. Vos Cauldron has not simply taken the throne and settled into peace. He has spent 5 years hunting down every surviving member of my family's line, every distant cousin, every child who might one day challenge his claim. Rael believes I am the last one left. Then you cannot go back, I said immediately. If he is hunting your family, going back means walking straight into danger. My people are suffering under his rule, Lyra said quietly. Rael writes that entire provinces have rebelled and been crushed, that the fleets my family once used to protect our worlds are now used to control them, that children go hungry, while Caldron builds monuments to his own victory. She looked up at me, and I saw something new in her eyes, something fierce beneath the fear. I ran once, Daniel, because I was a frightened girl, with no army, and no plan. I am not certain I am allowed to run again, not while my people suffer under the very man who murdered my family, to take what was never his. I did not know what to say to that. I had spent 5 years thinking I understood the woman sitting across from me, and in the span of one evening, I had learned that understanding was only the smallest fraction of who she truly was. There is something else, Lyra said, her voice dropping lower. Rael's letter says, loyalists have been quietly preparing for years, waiting for a true heir to return and lead them. If I answer this call, I will not be returning as a frightened refugee. I will be returning as a symbol for every person still fighting against Caldron's rule. That makes me more valuable to my enemies than ever before, and it makes anyone standing near me a target as well. She looked at me then, and I understood exactly what she meant without her having to say it aloud. You are worried about me, I said. I am terrified for you, she corrected. You gave me a home when I had nothing. You never once asked me to prove I deserved your kindness. If Caldron's people learn that I hid here, learn that you were the one who sheltered me, they will not hesitate to use you against me, or worse. Before I could answer her, a low hum rattled the windows of the house, gentle at first, then growing steadily louder. Lyra's head snapped toward the window, her whole body going rigid in an instant, every trace of the sadness in her expression replaced by something sharper, more alert. That is not Rael's signal, she said quietly. That ship is too heavy to be a single messenger. I moved to the window and looked out into the night sky, and my stomach dropped at what I saw. Far above the tree line, where only stars should have been, 3 points of light were descending slowly toward the earth, moving in careful formation, the kind of formation that spoke of discipline and purpose rather than chance. Lyra, I said, my voice barely above a whisper. Are those your people? She stood very still beside me, watching the lights grow larger, her jaw tight, her hands curled into fists at her sides. I do not know, she admitted, and that, Daniel, terrifies me more than anything else tonight. We stood together at that window, watching 3 ships descend toward the quiet fields I had worked my entire life, and I understood, with a cold certainty settling into my chest, that whatever peace we had built together over the past 5 years was about to end, one way or another, before the sun rose again. The 3 ships did not attack. They landed instead in the far field, past the old fence line, their engines cutting the tall grass flat in wide circles as they settled onto the ground. For a long moment, nothing happened. No doors opened. No lights moved. Lyra stood beside me at the window with her whole body tense, watching the ships the way a person watches a wild animal they cannot yet tell is friend or threat. Stay inside, she said finally. Not a chance, I said. She turned to look at me, and for a moment I thought she might argue, but something in my face must have told her it would be pointless. Instead, she nodded once, sharply, like a decision had been made, and walked toward the door. We stepped outside together into the cold night air. The hum from the ships had faded into a low, steady vibration that I could feel in my chest more than hear with my ears. A ramp lowered from the center ship, and light spilled out onto the grass, followed by figures walking down in careful, measured steps. There were 6 of them, tall, with the same gray-blue skin as Lyra, though theirs was marked with patterns I had never seen on her, thin lines that glowed faintly along their arms and necks. They wore armor, dark and simple, built for movement rather than show. At the front walked a man who moved like someone used to being obeyed, his eyes scanning the field, the house, and finally landing on Lyra with an intensity that made me want to step in front of her. Then his expression changed completely. He dropped to one knee in the wet grass without hesitation, and the 5 behind him followed instantly, bowing their heads low. Your Majesty, the man said, his voice thick with an emotion I could not quite name. We had begun to believe you were truly gone. Lyra stood very still for a moment, staring at the kneeling man, as if she could not quite believe he was real. Rael, she said softly. The man lifted his head, and I saw tears on his face. tears that looked strange against the strong, weathered features of someone who clearly carried the weight of command. 5 years, he said. 5 years I searched every corner of space we still had access to, chasing rumors, chasing nothing, refusing to believe our line had ended that night. When the seal confirmed a match to this world, I did not believe it. I thought it must be an error. I came myself to be certain. You found me, Lyra said, and her voice cracked slightly. You actually found me. I would have searched 1,000 years if I had to, Rael said, rising slowly to his feet, though the others remained kneeling behind him. Your people need you, my queen, more than you can know. It was strange, hearing someone speak to Lyra with that kind of formal weight, that title, when for 5 years I had known her as the woman who burned toast, and argued with me about which songs to play while we fixed fences. I watched Rael's eyes shift toward me for the first time, sharp and assessing, clearly wondering who I was, and why I stood so close to his queen, without any of the deference the others showed. This is Daniel, Lyra said, before Rael could ask. He found me when I first arrived on this world, wounded and alone. He gave me shelter for 5 years without ever asking anything in return. I would not be alive to receive your letter if not for him. Rael studied me for a long moment, and I could see him recalculating something behind his eyes, some judgment he had already begun to form being reworked in real time. Then you have my gratitude, he said finally, inclining his head toward me, though I noticed it was not nearly as deep a bow as the ones offered to Lyra. Few among our own people would have shown such kindness to a stranger, let alone one from another world entirely. There was something in the way he said it, a faint note of surprise, almost disbelief, that stuck with me even then. Lyra stepped forward, her posture shifting subtly as she spoke, straightening in a way I had never seen from her before, like some part of her that had been folded small for 5 years, was finally allowed to stand at full height. Tell me everything, she said. Do not soften it for me, Rael. I need the truth of what has happened. Rael's expression darkened. Cauldron's rule grows harsher by the season, he said. He controls the fleets, the core worlds, the trade routes that keep our people fed. Those who resist openly are removed, quietly or otherwise. Those who resist quietly are watched, their families threatened into silence. We have maintained a network of loyalists across a dozen worlds, waiting, hoping, for proof that your bloodline survived. That proof stands before me now. And if I return, Lyra said, what happens? If you return, Rael said, you become the single greatest threat to everything Cauldron has built. You are the rightful heir. Your presence alone would be enough to draw loyalists out of hiding across the entire system. It would also draw every soldier Cauldron commands, all searching for the same target. He hesitated. I will not lie to you, my queen. Returning means danger, unlike anything you have faced since the night you fled. But staying hidden means Cauldron's rule continues unchallenged, and our people continue to suffer under a man who murdered his way onto a throne that was never his. Lyra was quiet for a long moment, looking out over the dark field, toward the ships that had brought this impossible choice to her doorstep. I need time, she said finally, not to decide whether I care about my people. I have never stopped caring. I need time to understand what returning would truly cost, and who it would put at risk. Rael's eyes flicked toward me again, and this time I understood exactly what he was thinking, without him needing to say it. We should discuss this somewhere secure, he said. If the seal reached you, there is a chance others less loyal to your family could trace its signal as well. Cauldron has spies scattered further than we would like to admit. Lyra nodded slowly and led the group toward the house, and I followed behind, feeling suddenly like a visitor in the life I had built for the past 5 years, watching strangers from another world walk through my kitchen, with quiet, careful steps, as if the walls themselves might belong to someone important enough to deserve respect. Inside, Rael and the others removed their outer armor, revealing simpler clothing beneath, though they kept a watchful stillness that never fully relaxed. 2 of them, a woman named Sira and a broad, quiet man named Torben, took positions near the windows without being asked, clearly used to guarding their queen, even in unfamiliar territory. Tell me about Cauldron's forces, Lyra said, sitting at the same kitchen table where, 3 nights ago, she had told me the truth about who she really was. How many ships, how many worlds under his direct control. Rael answered carefully, laying out details I struggled to fully follow. numbers of fleets and worlds and names of places I had never heard. A picture slowly forming of an empire built on fear, held together by a man willing to do whatever it took to keep what he had taken by force. "There is one more thing," Rael said, his voice dropping lower. "Cauldron has grown paranoid in recent months. He has increased patrols along every known trade route, searching for any sign of resistance gathering strength. If our ships were tracked here, even partially, it will not take him long to send someone to investigate." "How long?" Lyra asked. "Days," Rael admitted. "Perhaps less." I felt a cold weight settle into my stomach at those words. This was not some distant threat, some far-off war happening on a world I would never see. This was coming here, to my farm, to the town where Nathan ran his shop and Grace fed her chickens every morning, and Oliver complained about his tractor breaking down every other week. People who had no idea any of this existed were suddenly standing far too close to a fight that had followed Lyra across the stars. "If Cauldron sends soldiers here," I said slowly, "what happens to the people in this town?" Rael's eyes met mine, and for the first time, I saw something like genuine concern in his expression, though I could not tell if it was for the townspeople or simply for the complications their presence might cause. "If Cauldron's forces believe your queen has hidden among a primitive world with no meaningful defenses," he said carefully, "they will not hesitate to use overwhelming force to secure her, regardless of what stands in their way." "These are not primitive people," I said, sharper than I meant to. "They are my neighbors, my friends, people who have never done anything to deserve being caught in the middle of a war they don't even know exists." Rael studied me for a moment, and I saw Syrah and Torben exchange a brief glance near the window, something unreadable passing between them. "You misunderstand me," Rael said finally. "I do not say this to insult your people. I say it because Cauldron's forces will see this world exactly as I described, and will act accordingly, without hesitation or mercy. Your kindness toward my queen does not change how they will view the rest of your world." Lyra placed a hand gently on the table, drawing everyone's attention back to her. "Then we make certain they are wrong," she said firmly. "Daniel gave me shelter when I had nothing. I will not repay that kindness by allowing this world to be treated as an afterthought in a war it never asked to join." "What are you proposing?" Rael asked carefully. "If Cauldron's forces come," Lyra said, "we do not simply run. We do not simply hide. We prepare, and we make certain that whoever comes through that sky regrets underestimating the people of this world, just as I once underestimated them myself." I looked at her, this woman I had known for 5 years as someone who burned toast and hummed strange songs and argued about which movies to watch on quiet evenings, now speaking with the calm, unshakable authority of someone who had been born to lead, and I realized, perhaps for the first time, just how much of herself she had kept folded away, waiting for a moment exactly like this one. Rael studied her for a long moment, and something shifted in his expression, respect mixing with the loyalty that had clearly never wavered. "You have grown, my queen," he said quietly. "The girl I remember would have run without looking back. The woman standing before me now sounds ready to fight for something greater than herself." "I had a good teacher," Lyra said, glancing briefly toward me, and despite everything, despite the fear still sitting heavy in my chest, I felt something warm bloom there as well. Outside, the wind picked up, rattling the old windows of the house, and somewhere far above the clouds, I could not shake the feeling that we were no longer simply waiting for danger to arrive. We were preparing to meet it head-on, and for the first time since that green light had split open the night sky, I understood exactly what side I was standing on, no matter what it might cost me. "Then we do not have much time," Rael said, rising to his feet. "If Cauldron's forces are already searching, we must assume they will arrive sooner rather than later. We need every advantage this world can offer. And we need your people, Daniel, ready to defend their own homes if it comes to that." I thought of Nathan behind his shop counter, of Grace tending her garden every morning without fail, of Oliver and his endless complaints about his tractor, none of them having any idea that within days, the quiet life they knew might collide head-on with a war fought among the stars. "They deserve to know what is coming," I said. "All of it. No half-truths." Lyra nodded slowly, though I could see the weight of that decision settling heavily on her shoulders. "Then we tell them," she said. Together. And as the first gray light of dawn began creeping over the hills outside, I understood that the peaceful, ordinary life I had built alongside Lyra for 5 years had ended the moment that letter fell from the sky, and whatever came next, we would face it, not as a hidden queen and the man who sheltered her, but as a town preparing, together, for a fight none of us had ever expected to be part of. The sky tore open 2 days later, and the first thing I heard was Grace screaming from her garden. I had spent those 2 days trying to explain the impossible to people I had known my entire life. Nathan had stared at me across his shop counter for a full minute, before finally saying he believed me, only because he trusted me too much to think I would make up something this strange. Oliver had laughed at first, then stopped laughing the moment Rael's ship rose silently over the tree line during our conversation, hovering just long enough to prove every word true. Grace had simply nodded, calm in a way that surprised me, and said that in 80 years of living, she had learned the world was always stranger than people wanted to admit. By the time the enemy ships arrived, most of the town knew the truth, and to their credit, not one of them ran. The first ship broke through the clouds with a sound like thunder ripping in half, dark and angular, nothing like the smooth, careful lines of Rael's vessels. 2 more followed close behind, spreading out over the fields in a formation that left no doubt about their purpose. Lyra stood beside me at the edge of my property, her posture straight, her eyes locked on the sky with an intensity that made the fear in my chest settle into something steadier. "They found us faster than we hoped," Rael said, appearing at her other side, armor sealed, weapon already in hand. "Then we do exactly what we planned," Lyra said. No hesitation. Around us, the town had transformed in ways I never could have imagined 2 days earlier. Nathan, and a dozen others, had rigged old farm equipment into makeshift barriers along the main road, using tractors and trailers to funnel any approaching force into narrow paths where numbers would not matter as much as position. Oliver had spent both days teaching anyone willing to listen how to use hunting rifles with real accuracy, insisting that if the enemy expected primitive weapons used well would still catch them off guard. Grace, of all people, had organized the town's older residents into a communication network, using old radios and hand signals to pass information faster than any of us expected. Rael's people had shared what little advanced equipment they carried, small devices that could disrupt enemy tracking systems within a limited range, and shields that could be worn on the arm to deflect a handful of energy blasts before failing. It was not much compared to what descended from those ships, but it was more than we would have had otherwise, and combined with the terrain we knew better than any invader ever could, it gave us a fighting chance. The enemy ships landed in the same field Rael's vessels had used 2 days before, and soldiers began pouring out, armored in black, moving with the same shifting, unnatural agility Lyra sometimes showed without thinking, though theirs carried none of the warmth I had grown used to. At their front walked a tall figure whose presence alone seemed to make the air feel colder, and I did not need Lyra's sharp intake of breath beside me to know exactly who he was. "Cauldron," she whispered. He stopped roughly 100 paces from where we stood, his eyes finding Lyra immediately, a slow, cold smile spreading across his face. "Alive after all these years," he called out, his voice carrying easily across the field. "Hiding among insects, on a world not even worth conquering. I almost admire the strategy, little queen, almost." "You will not take another life from my family," Lyra said, her voice steady despite the fear I knew she must be feeling. "Not today, not ever again." Cauldron laughed, low and humorless. "You stand behind farm animals and rusted machinery, protected by creatures who have not even mastered flight beyond their own atmosphere," he said. "I did not come here to negotiate. I came to finish what should have ended 5 years ago." He raised one hand, and the soldiers behind him began to advance. What happened next unfolded faster than I could fully process, even now, remembering it. Nathan and the others triggered the barriers exactly as planned, forcing the first wave of soldiers into the narrow paths between overturned equipment, where Oliver's makeshift marksmen opened fire, with a precision that clearly caught the invaders off guard. Their armor absorbed most shots but not all, and the confusion bought precious seconds that Rael's people used to strike with far more devastating accuracy, their weapons cutting through the chaos with practiced ease. Lyra moved beside me in a blur, and for the first time, I truly understood what it meant that she had been born into a line of rulers who did not simply command armies, but fought alongside them. She moved like something out of a dream, meeting soldiers twice her size, with a speed and precision that left them on the ground before they could fully register what had happened. This was not the woman who burned toast and hummed quiet songs while fixing fences. This was the queen Rael had spent 5 years searching for, finally standing in her full strength. I fought too, though not with the same grace. I fought with the stubborn desperation of a man defending everything he had ever known, using whatever came to hand, guiding neighbors into position, pulling Oliver out of the path of a blast that would have ended his life a second later, watching Grace's communication network give us just enough warning to avoid disaster more than once. The battle stretched on, brutal and chaotic, and for a long, terrible stretch of time, it seemed like Cauldron's forces would simply overwhelm us through sheer numbers, despite every advantage of terrain and preparation we had built. Then something shifted. Cauldron himself stepped forward, clearly growing impatient with his soldiers' failure to end things quickly, his eyes locking onto Lyra with an intensity that promised this fight was about to become personal in ways none of us were ready for. He moved toward her with terrifying speed, and for one heart-stopping moment, I thought I was about to watch the woman who had shared my home for 5 years die in the same field where his soldiers had first landed to claim her. But Lyra did not run, and she did not falter. She met him head-on, and the fight that followed was unlike anything else happening across that field. Faster, sharper, carrying the weight of 5 years of grief and fear, finally given a target worth facing. Cauldron was strong, trained, confident in a victory he clearly believed was inevitable, but Lyra fought with something he did not have, something that had grown in her over 5 years, on a world he considered beneath his notice. She fought with the strength of someone who had learned, truly learned, what it meant to protect people, simply because they mattered, not because law or bloodline demanded it. I could not look away, even as chaos continued around me, even as Rael shouted orders, and Nathan dragged a wounded neighbor to safety, and Oliver reloaded with shaking hands. I watched Lyra meet every strike Cauldron threw at her, watched her absorb blows that would have ended most fights instantly, watched her rise again and again with a determination that seemed to unsettle him more with every passing second. Then, in one final exchange, faster than my eyes could fully follow, Lyra broke through his defense and ended the fight, standing over him with a stillness that carried more weight than any victory shout could have. Cauldron's soldiers, seeing their leader defeated, hesitated, and that hesitation was all Rael's forces needed to press their advantage fully, driving the remaining invaders back toward their ships in a retreat that grew more disorganized with every passing moment. Within minutes, the enemy ships lifted off the ground and disappeared back into the sky, leaving behind a field scarred with the marks of battle, and a town that had, against every impossible odd, held its ground against an enemy from beyond the stars. Lyra stood in the center of that field, breathing hard, blood on her arm from a wound she had not once mentioned during the fight, and looked out over the people who had fought beside her, farmers and shop owners and old women with radios, none of them soldiers by trade, all of them refusing to back down when it mattered most. Rael approached her slowly, awe clear on his face despite the exhaustion carved into every line of his expression. "I have fought beside armies my entire life," he said quietly, "and I have never seen anything like what happened here today." Lyra looked around at the townspeople slowly gathering, checking on each other, tending wounds, some crying, some laughing, with the strange relief that follows surviving something impossible. "Neither have I," she said softly, and for the first time since the letter had first fallen from the sky, I saw something close to hope settle into her expression. I walked toward her across the battle-scarred field, my own body aching in more places than I could count, and when she saw me approaching, something in her posture finally relaxed, the queen giving way once more to the woman I had spent 5 years building a life beside. "You are hurt," I said, nodding toward the wound on her arm. "I have been hurt worse," she said, though she let me help support her weight as the adrenaline finally began to fade. "We won, Daniel. Against everything he brought, we won." "Your people fought well," Rael said, joining us, his gaze sweeping across the field one more time. "Word of this will spread, my queen. Cauldron's forces will not soon forget what happened here today, and neither will those still hiding, waiting for a reason to believe resistance is still possible." Lyra looked out over the field, over the people she had come to know these past 5 years. Ordinary people, who had just proven themselves capable of standing against something none of them fully understood, simply because it threatened someone they had chosen to protect. "This is not the end," she said quietly, more to herself than to either of us. "Cauldron will return, stronger, angrier, more determined than ever. But today, we prove something worth remembering. We prove that strength is not only measured in fleets and weapons, but in the willingness of ordinary people to stand together when it matters most." As the sun began to set over a field that would carry the scars of this day for a long time, I understood that whatever came next, whatever choice Lyra ultimately made about returning to reclaim her throne, this town, this quiet, unremarkable corner of an unimportant world, had just written itself into a story far larger than any of us had ever imagined possible. 3 weeks passed before Lyra finally told me she had made her decision, and in those 3 weeks, I watched her change in ways that both amazed me and quietly broke my heart. The town had rebuilt what damage it could, and the ones who had lost more than fences and barns were helped by neighbors who now understood, more than ever, what it meant to stand together. Nathan reopened his shop within days, joking that he had survived an alien invasion, and a broken window was hardly worth complaining about. Oliver spoke less about his tractor, and more about the strange, quiet pride he carried from those chaotic hours in the field. Grace kept her radios close, saying she had a feeling this would not be the last time this town needed to talk to each other fast. And Lyra spent those 3 weeks, split between 2 worlds, one foot still in the quiet farmhouse life she had built with me, the other, already stepping toward the responsibility waiting for her among the stars. Rael and his people had not left. They set up a small camp near the edge of my land, careful not to draw unwanted attention, while reports slowly filtered in from scattered loyalists across a dozen worlds. Word of what happened on Earth had spread exactly as Rael predicted, though not in the way Cauldron had hoped. Instead of proving Lyra weak or foolish for hiding among what he called an unimportant world, the story that spread was one of a queen who had found allies capable of standing against overwhelming odds, allies who fought not out of duty or fear, but out of genuine loyalty freely given. That story, more than anything else, seemed to shake something loose across worlds that had spent 5 years believing resistance was pointless. One evening, near the end of those 3 weeks, I found Lyra sitting alone on the back porch, staring up at a clear night sky, filled with more stars than I usually bothered to notice. I sat down beside her without a word, the way we had sat together countless evenings over the past 5 years, and waited. "I have made my decision," she said finally. "I figured," I said. "You have that same look you get before doing something you are not sure you are ready for." She laughed softly, though the sound carried more weight than humor. "I am returning," she said, "not to hide, not to run, but to finish what Cauldron started 5 years ago. My people have suffered long enough, under a man who murdered his way onto a throne he was never meant to hold. I cannot continue standing aside while they wait for someone willing to fight for them." "I know," I said, and I meant it. I had known this moment was coming since the night that green light first split open the sky above my farm. "There is something else," she said, turning to look at me directly, her golden eyes catching the moonlight in a way that still, after 5 years, managed to steal my breath a little. "I do not wish to go alone, Daniel. Not because I need protection, though I will not pretend the road ahead will be easy. I do not wish to go without you, because these past 5 years taught me something I never expected to learn from a quiet farmer on an unimportant world." "What is that?" I asked, though some part of me already suspected the answer. "That leadership is not about bloodline or law," she said. "It is about choosing, every single day, to care for the people around you, even when it costs you something. You taught me that, without ever intending to. I would be honored, more than I can fully express, if you stood beside me, as I try to build something better for my people, the same way you stood beside this town, when it needed you most." I sat with that for a long moment, looking out over the fields I had worked my entire life, the same fields where soldiers from another world had once fought and fallen, where ordinary neighbors had proven themselves extraordinary when it mattered most. "I never planned on becoming part of some story about queens and stolen thrones," I said slowly. But I also never planned on falling in love with someone who fell out of the sky into my life 5 years ago, and yet here we are. Lyra's breath caught softly at that, and I realized, perhaps for the first time, that I had never actually said those words aloud before. Not clearly, not without hiding behind jokes or half-explanations, but sitting there, under a sky that had brought both danger and truth into our lives. It felt like exactly the right moment to finally say them plainly. "I love you too," she said quietly. "I have for longer than I think either of us wanted to admit." We sat together in silence after that, letting the weight of everything settle around us, the fear and the fighting and the impossible truths, all of it finally giving way to something simpler and steadier underneath. The day Lyra prepared to leave, most of the town gathered near the field where her allies' ships waited, ready to carry her back toward a fight that would likely take months, perhaps years, to fully resolve. Nathan brought food for the journey, insisting no queen of his acquaintance would travel across the stars on an empty stomach. Grace hugged her tightly, whispering something in her ear that made Lyra laugh through unexpected tears. Oliver simply shook her hand, then mine, saying only that he expected updates whenever we managed to send them. Rail stood near the ramp of the largest ship, watching the exchange with quiet respect. "Word will spread that the Queen did not return alone," he said, as Lyra and I approached, "that she returns with a human ally at her side, one who fought and bled alongside her people when it mattered most. Some among the old families will not know what to make of that." "Then it is time they learned," Lyra said firmly. "The old ways brought us cauldron. Perhaps it is time we build something new." As we boarded the ship, I took one last look back at the farm, the fields, the town I had lived in my entire life, now forever changed by 5 impossible years, and one letter that had fallen from the sky. I did not know exactly what waited for us among the stars, what dangers Cauldron's remaining forces might still bring, or how Lyra's people would truly react to a queen who returned not with armies of her own bloodline, but with allies, gathered from a world they had once dismissed as unimportant. But I knew, sitting there beside Lyra, as the ship's engines began to hum beneath us, that whatever came next, we would face it together, the same way we had faced everything, since the night I found her wounded and afraid behind my barn, 5 years ago, long before either of us understood how far that quiet, unexpected friendship would eventually carry us. The engines rose to a steady roar, and the ship lifted slowly off the ground, carrying us up past the clouds, past the sky that had once seemed like the edge of everything I would ever know, and out toward a future neither of us could fully predict, but one we had chosen, finally, to face together. Below us, the farm grew smaller, then disappeared entirely into the green and brown patchwork of fields and forests, and somewhere among the stars ahead, a throne waited for a queen who had spent 5 years learning, from the most unlikely teachers imaginable, exactly what kind of ruler she wanted to become. I looked over at Lyra, watching the determination settle steadily across her face as our world fell away behind us, and I understood, with a certainty I had never felt about anything before, that whatever waited for us out there among those stars, we were ready to meet it, side by side, exactly as we had always been meant to.